I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for joining us for one of our talks today. Today, we're thrilled to be talking about Ghostwriter, which is a new podcast movie from C13 Features. Today, we are joined by Chris Corcoran, who is the Chief Content Officer and founding partner of Cadence 13, Kate Mara, and Adam Scott. And Chris, I wanted to start by talking to you about the genesis and development of these projects, because it's a whole series of movie podcasts. And I think what you've done is really wonderful in the auditory experience that you're trying to create for listeners, in that you are working with a lot of performers like Adam and Kate, directors and writers who come from a cinematic background to really translate that into a listening experience for the audience. And so I was interested in the moment that you realized that that was a really vital part of how you wanted to present these stories across different genres, and how you feel that's really elevated the work that you're producing right now.
Absolutely. And first of all, I appreciate your time here, and just want to give a shout out to Kate and Adam here, who did a phenomenal job on this project, Ghostwriter, which quickly went to #1 in the Apple Podcast fiction charts already, and it's doing extremely well. So really proud of this one. But yeah, Cadence 13 has been in the podcast space for a long time. As you mentioned, I'm one of the founding partners, started about in 2015. The space has evolved like crazy. So we're always looking for what is that space that people really haven't tapped into, but also the experience. And clearly it's a very crowded space in a good way, as the space kind of explodes. And we haven't dipped into scripted on the C13 side. We've done a ton with documentaries, with C13 originals, with some huge shows like Gone South and Root of Evil, and some other huge ones that are out there, and other big shows like Glennon Doyle and those shows. But for scripted, we want to do something completely different. And really, the inspiration was kind of like 3 years ago, when I was reading more about what Barry Diller did back in the day, and made the first TV movie experience, and kind of disrupted the TV space a little bit and the movie industry, and making these kind of one episode, a beginning and a middle and an end movie experience, but just for TV. And I thought for this space, that's very interesting, because a lot of the scripted stuff, both in documentary and the actual scripted stuff in podcasting, has multiple episodes, which is great. But again, we wanted to differentiate and think of this experience almost as if you're in the movies, feeling the same emotions and experience of being there, but with your eyes closed. So it has that same beginning, middle, and an end, that amazing arc. And our goal here was to make them super premium, from the production, from the music, the sound design, the editing, like everything, but also the stories. It always starts with the story. And I think we have an amazing story here, and also with our previous one, Treat, starring Kiernan Shipka, and then with casting. So you've got to have the mix of all of that in there. And then, like I mentioned in the beginning, having Kate and Adam and the performance that they gave here was really incredible, and it lifted the whole thing to new heights. So I think that's the goal here, to create this brand new listening experience. And I think the response early on, both from Treat and now we're seeing with this one, is giving those listeners that feeling that they love the story, but they also love this experience of not waiting, but having it all right there and going through those emotions in that, small 90-minute arc.
Yeah. And then, Kate, I wanted to jump into talking about your character development process, because you're playing a woman who, has gone through a lot of emotional and psychological turmoil in her life, having lost her mother. She hasn't left her apartment in 6 months. And at the same time, she has this incredibly robust background as a journalist, and it's very clear that she was incredibly adept at her job. And I thought that what was interesting is that that leads so much into the conversations that your character is having with Adam's character, James, in the way that she talks to people, the way that she asks questions, the way that she kind of breaks down barriers and walls a little bit. And so I was interested how you looked at that background and history for her as a journalist, and really shaped out what that experience was for her, and how that really informed a lot of your delivery and performance in these character interactions for you.
Yeah, I thought the character was really interesting to play, especially sort of coming out of, well, not even coming out of, but like just having the experience of being sort of in quarantine for so long recently for everybody. I think it's something now that everybody can relate to, is just being in your home, wherever that is, however big or small that is. Everybody has an experience of that, whether it be for, 2 weeks or a year, depending on how seriously you took it and how it affected you and still affects you. Working from home, all of these things I think are very, very relatable at this point in our lives. So I thought that was, to me, that was very intriguing to play this character for that reason, as well as many others. I thought that it was interesting to see sort of how she uses her own struggles to connect with other people. I don't even think she necessarily knows that that's what she's doing, but I thought that was fun to play. And I also just was excited and am very excited about this type of experience, podcast experience, because it's so sort of, it's taking us back to old fashioned sort of, when people would just sit in their homes, and like, it actually reminds me of Christmas and being at home for the holidays and stuff, when you're at home with your family, just like sitting around, whether it's sitting around the fireplace or the table, and you're, in my mind, in the olden days, as we called them in our house, it's like, well, we didn't have TVs. You had to listen to the radio and listen to like, a radio show or whatever, and really use your imagination to picture everything you're actually hearing. And I love that we're doing that now with podcast movies. I was excited to be a part of that. I think that is a really, really good idea. And it's, it's surprising to me that it hasn't really been done yet. So I'm excited to be a part of that.
Yeah. And then Adam, talking a little bit about your character's persona and his backstory, it's very clear that from his upbringing and from a lot of the details that we learn about him throughout the piece, that this is someone who is kind of used to things going a certain way and used to having the upper hand and having a certain control in the situation, even if it is just having a conversation with someone, and sometimes that plays out in smaller ways, like, calling Kate when she's not expecting him to, and pushing her to start working in the way that he wants to, or even just being 90 minutes late to a meeting and just stepping straight in as if that's completely normal. And I was interested for you in how you wanted to shape this character, where there are a lot of those small details and nuances to the interactions that James and Kate have together, in which he's always kind of trying to make sure that he has a little bit of control and a little bit of the upper hand in the situation for himself.
Yeah, I think, one of those people who, like you said, is used to things going his way. I think there's a certain kind of uber rich person who has a certain expectation of the world and how the world will open up to them and treat them. And I think that he's grew up with people who kind of bought their way through life, and it's what he knows. And so that's how he's going to operate. But he obviously has a past that looms pretty large, that he's sort of buried in his mind. And so his way of dealing with it, rather than, I don't know, going to psychotherapy, he's dealing with it by kind of putting layer upon layer of dysfunction and denial, until he ends up wanting to write a fictional book with Kate. And that's how he's going to kind of exercise these demons, is through this quote unquote fictional expression of these demons. And yeah, that's kind of how I felt this. I think it was sort of this straightforward yet extremely complicated way of dealing with this traumatic past.
And I was interested, Adam and Kate, process-wise, whether you had the opportunity to work together in the recording booth in putting this together, because I could see there being an advantage to both ways. One is that your characters are strangers and they're getting to know each other. And so not being in the same space would kind of lend itself to that natural progression. And at the same time, there's also the dynamic that you get to build by being in the room with one another. So what did that look like for the two of you, and how you worked together recording this?
Adam, I'm going to let you go first, because there's a huge spider right next to me.
Can we see it?
Yes. Let's see. It's on the wall. Can you see it? Oh, it's in the corner.
Oh, yeah,
I can see it.
That's okay. Pretty big.
Yes. You answer while I free the spider.
I'll fill time while you're going to free it.
We're saving spiders.
This might take a while. We read it together, but we weren't in the same. We were over, Zoom or whatever, in two different recording studios. So it was like being together because we would have been in two separate booths. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe we would have been in the same room. But it was like it was great that we got to record it together rather than record it separately. We weren't in the same room, but it was as if we were. It's great that we were able to actually record it, because sometimes usually with like animation stuff, you record it by yourself. You're not with the other people.
And
okay, perfect timing. So
How is he? Is he all right?
He's now outside. He's free. We didn't have to kill him. I thought it was funny actually recording this together, because for actually a lot of it, we're not supposed to be able to, for all of it. No, there's a few moments on FaceTime, but we're not supposed to be, seeing each other. It's just supposed to be on the phone. So it was kind of funny because you're like, oh, I'm not supposed to be looking at you. So
yeah.
So it was a little bit, interesting to attempt to not actually look at the other person, because it does affect your performance when you're looking at somebody and when you're just hearing their voice,
And I think that kind of lends itself to a question I had for you, Chris, about a lot of the language and the use of sound design in these pieces, because, it's very specific in that there are a couple of moments where we get more visual descriptions. When the character Kate describes her apartment, that's a lot of visual detailing for the audience and really lends itself. And the sound design, it feels like it's very carefully curated in terms of when we have sound effects in the background, what those specific sounds are. And was that something that you were working closely with the creative team on, figuring out what that needed to look like and how much was going to be just enough to really enhance the story but not overpower it?
Totally. And I think a few things on that. First, the material and the scripts that we look at have to have, or at least it has to get to a point where it works for audio, right? Because there is no visual here. So you have to create a scene and these environments where it's only audio and no visual. So I think that's important. And this story lends itself perfectly to that. With anyone who hears this or has heard it, you're going to get that right away, with Kate's character, Kate, being in her apartment, and Adam's character, James, being, whether it's on an airplane or a different city or whatever it may be, you are literally transported and feel like you're there. And the sound design is literally created for that. You hear a phone ring or the doorbell or whatever, you jump, you feel like it's in your room. You feel like you're trapped. It's very Hitchcockian in terms of the psychological thriller in that vein. So you feel that throughout, but the sound design, the music, the editing, and then the characters in the story itself all lend itself to that. And I think the depth of the characters of these two, and that relationship and that bond that grows from the start, to where it goes, is phenomenal, because they each have their own things that they're dealing with that you'll hear, but there is a deep connection and trust that's also built throughout this arc. So that, on top of the sound design, everything is played to audio. But obviously you can visualize this too, which is kind of cool. The theater of the mind can take you like, oh, I wonder what they look like. I wonder what that apartment looks like. All of that stuff, feels really right, but it works so well.
And jumping back to you, Adam and Kate, kind of going back to what we were talking about a little bit before with the character of Kate, being enclosed in her apartment. At the same time, every single phone call that they have, the character of James is somewhere different in the world. He's calling from a different country. He's calling from a different space. And there's so many elements that are real juxtapositions with your characters. And yet there's real kind of underthread of emotional linearity. And they both come from having processed a lot of trauma, like both of you were talking about before. And they're both dealing with a lot of internal emotional things at the same time that they really managed to connect with one another on. And so I was interested in not just how you looked at the juxtapositions of your characters, but how you really found those moments that were going to be those connective threads that are really kind of what start pulling us into those conversations that they're having with one another.
I mean, I would say credit to our director, because she was very helpful in finding those specific moments for us and with us. It was very collaborative. And also, one of the great things about recording a podcast is that you can do it all, unlike a film, you can do it all in order. So it's super helpful for us as actors to be able to, read it almost like you're reading a play or something. And it's easier to remember like the timeline and everything when you're actually when you're able to do it chronologically like that. So, but yeah, I definitely felt like it was something that we were finding together with Adam and our director Kimberly as well. It was a great sort of collaborative experience.
Yeah, I agree. You know, yeah, it was really really fun. You know, I listened to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks, and I find it, you know, something that I love about it is, and you know, there aren't many scripted. I mean, there are a few scripted podcasts, but it's a really tough needle to thread to do it well. And I think C13 and Kimberly have done it really really well. But you know, there's like an intimacy to it that you get when you're listening to a podcast that you're really into, or an audio book. It's such a singular experience. It's sort of, you're walking around and it's like a secret that you're listening to this thing. And it's like it's happening inside your head. And so like Kate was saying, it's kind of activates the imagination, but it's also just this kind of intimate storytelling experience. So it was really fun to sort of build that with Kate and Kimberly. And, you know, we, you know, took a few stabs at each scene, just sort of trying it a few different ways, just to find, until it really clicked into place and felt right. And we all three of us felt great about it. So it was really fun. And I really appreciate C13, you know, flying me around because we recorded all that stuff. Like I was in Italy, I was in Budapest, and so that was super cool.
Podcast budgets are just huge, so it's very easy for us.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And going back to what you were just saying, Kate, about the ability to obviously record this in order as well, I was interested in how that lent itself to the emotional trajectory of your character, particularly when it comes to her mental health, because this is someone who really has been struggling in a lot of different ways. And we learned that her mother has a history of mental health struggles within the family as well. You know, and there's moments where she's going onto medication, and then because she's left her job and can't afford to pay for the health insurance, she's off her medication briefly. And so there's a lot of different trajectories and moments that you have to play to that and speak to that. And I thought you did it really beautifully, authentically, and sensitively in your performance in this piece. And so I was interested in how recording everything in order really lent itself to that part of the process for you, but also what that research looked like for you in terms of really understanding that side of your character.
Well, interestingly, like Adam and I were able to record all of our stuff together, and we did that sort of over 2 days in chronological order. But then there was so much of the movie that I am just alone, talking to myself or panicking alone. So I sort of did that all at once, you know, by myself with our director via Zoom. And I guess because you're enclosed in like a small booth, and you're again, everything is it feels very intimate because of our locations. I was in LA and she was in our director Kimberly was in New York. We weren't even in the same vicinity, so it weirdly feels lonely, and like it was easy to sort of get lost in this space. And because sometimes a lot of the time you can feel very silly. You know, it's almost like when you do ADR for a film or TV or whatever, and you have to go back and, you know, do certain moments that feel ridiculous alone in a booth. But for this, it actually lends itself to the story and to where my character was, because she is alone and has been for so long, and her only connection to people has really been via phone and or FaceTime, and occasionally someone knocks on the door to take out her trash. It's like it was helpful to be sort of alone, feeling a little bit crazy, you know, having to like ramp up these panicky moments and things. But again, it was something that I felt like our director was really, she was able to really guide me, and tell me where, what was too much or not enough, based on where we are in the story, and where the character is emotionally in those moments. So yeah, it was fun. It's a fun challenge to have to do that alone rather than with another actor.
Yeah. And Adam, with your character, there's always a little bit of an enigma around him, and he's very conscientious about what he chooses to reveal about himself and when he chooses to reveal things throughout this. Was there a conscientiousness on your part about thinking about how much information you kind of wanted the audience to have, how much you wanted them to know about his intentions at different points, and that side of him?
Yeah, I think, the script really takes care of a lot of that. Alex wrote a really fun character, really kind of mysterious and compelling character, and that's that's where a great writer kind of does your work for you, and all you really need to do is find a way to say it that doesn't sound fake. And she's already sort of figured out the circumstance it's in. And yeah, a lot of it was sort of trying to remain neutral and not leaning in too far one way or the other. So it could be interpreted a variety of ways.
And for all of you, each of these film pieces that C13 are putting together are different genres, but this one obviously leans very heavily into psychological suspense. There's kind of thriller aspects to it. And so I was interested for all of you if that was something that there was conscientiousness about really making sure that that tone was captured throughout, or if it was something that was more just driven by characters, the way that they'd been written, the way that the scripts really naturally play into that, or a myriad of both of those sides.
Yeah, and I could touch that too, because even from the script, and as Adam points out, Alex Sobler, who wrote it, she's a playwright, did a brilliant job on the script. A lot of it was kind of pretty clean going into this. We didn't have to touch it much. It was great. But I think yeah, even in the descriptions writing, you can't give away too much at all here, because the story unfolds quickly. You want to let the listener kind of dive in and feel that. But from our end on the outside, on the production side and the writing side, you can't give away too many things here, but you got to keep them intrigued from the beginning to the end. So that's the tricky part of this, as we know in anything, whether you're reading a book, watching something, listening to a podcast, those first 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, you got to lock people in. And I think this does that in a great way, but then there's so many breadcrumbs along the way. I think these guys did an amazing job. So you feel like, okay, there's something happening and there's a lot of twists and stuff like that. But that was the goal from our end.
And how about for the two of you with your performances in that regard?
Yeah, I think something that's ends up being suspenseful. I think the idea, whether it's a movie or TV show or a podcast movie, I guess the idea would be to as much as you can once it's starting, is to establish sort of the casual, nothing's wrong everydayness of it, so then it has somewhere to turn. And most of the sort of terror and suspense is on Kate. A lot of this was on her to ratchet up the tension and all of that, and I think she did an incredible job.
You forget how important, I think, or I forgot how incredibly effective and important just sounds are.
Yeah.
I mean, music obviously is so effective in film and TV and just in our lives in general. It creates such emotion for everybody. But just sounds alone. I mean, I know that when I watch scary movies, instead of closing my eyes during scary parts, even as a kid, I would hold my ears, and I sort of forgot that. And then when I was making this and then listening to it after, when it was done with all of the sounds of just even like a door opening or the sound of a creaky floor, all of those things are so incredibly effective in telling a story and setting a tone, So that was kind of exciting to to listen to and to experience.
And then lastly, for you, Adam and Kate, what do you feel that you really learned about yourselves as actors from the very specific type of performance that you had to find for this project?
I don't know if I learned anything about myself yet. Sometimes that comes later. But it was a nice, it's a different experience, like I've done different podcasts and things, but never like never a movie, never something that is sort of this, never a movie experience. And it feels different than doing a play or doing a film or just doing, a voice on a show or an animated show, whatever. It is an exciting challenge as an actor, because you're like, all of the tiny subtle things that you do or try to do when you don't have dialogue in a film or TV, you can't rely on any of those things. So it's, you really have to use your voice and in ways that maybe I wouldn't think to do or have to do otherwise. So that, that's a fun thing to learn. And so that was something that I had a good time sort of experiencing here.
Yeah, same. I kind of had never really thought about, just doing a performance just strictly through the voice, because it is different than animation, which I think Kate and I have both done, where you do a voice in something and then it's going to be assisted by a visual element, whereas this is just going to be our voices. So yeah, you have to kind of try and fit it all in there. And again, you don't want to lean in too hard because it'll sound corny. So there's sort of a happy medium there, and having a great script really does a lot of the work for us, as far as putting us in situations where we can just have this conversation and it ratchets up tension, or it's funny, or whatever it is. It's kind of goes back to the writing in a lot of cases.
Well, it's a really, really wonderful audio film that you've all put together. And Chris, I'm so excited to hear the rest of the series as they continue to roll out. Thank you so much to all three of you for talking about this today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mara.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mara.
Appreciate it, guys.